Hello, everyone. My name is Tammy Maureen. I'm with the Center for Interactive Learning and Collaboration, also known as CILC. And I'm glad you're able to join us today for our Community of Learning event with the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. For our program today, I just want to take a moment and remind everyone that if you have questions, we're going to go ahead and throw those in the chat. If you have answers to questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. And we hope this doesn't happen, but if you have any technology issues, I'm here behind the scenes to help you out. You can just let me know in the chat and I'll help you out too with those. Today, like I said, we're joined by the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and we're able to do this program thanks to them being part of CILC's community of learning. CILC provides a program every Tuesday through Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. You could check out our amazing schedule by going to cilc.org/community. You can also learn about all the great programs the Museum of Fine Arts Boston does by checking out the link I put into the chat right there. So definitely book a program directly with them and go in depth on different topics all about art and different artists that are out there. So I encourage you to book with them. Also, if you'd like to, they have an amazing website. And I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat also. After we're done with, you can definitely look on their website and learn more about what they have to offer. And if you ever make it to Boston, you'll get the chance to see all this great art in person, but you can do a little preview of it on their website. But at this time, I'm going to hand it on over to Lauren, our amazing presenter today. We're going to be looking at exploring Impressionism with art, Impressionism, art of Claude Monet. Go ahead, Lauren, and take it away.
All right, thank you so much. It's really great to be with all of you today. I'm so excited to see all the different places you're joining from. So again, my name is Lauren Yokel. I am the Senior Distance Learning Educator here at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And I'm going to start out today by doing just a little introduction to where I am. You all told me where you're joining from, so I'm going to tell you a bit about where I am today. And then after I do that, we're going to jump into talking about Impressionism. And we'll get to move through the museum gallery. And I have a few specific artworks that I have planned to show you today that we'll look at and talk about together. So again, feel free to use the chat at any time throughout the program. I'm always happy to hear your comments and your questions as we go along. So you don't have to wait till the end. Happy to hear from you at any point. And I'm going to start, I'm going to pull up, I'm joining you today from inside the museum galleries, but I'm going to pull up just a few other images of the museum. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, or the MFA is what we usually call it. You might hear me refer to it as the MFA. All right, so the Museum of Fine Arts is located in Boston, Massachusetts. And the MFA's collections include artwork from ancient all the way up to modern times. We have art from all around the world. And we also have art by local Boston area artists. We have all different types of art. So we have painting, sculpture, photography. We have jewelry, we have textiles. We even have a collection of musical instruments. So there is a lot to explore in this museum. And today we're just going to focus in on one specific area. But as a museum, we are focused on welcoming diverse perspectives, both within the artwork and among our visitors, and being a place where many different worldviews meet. So that's a little bit about the museum where I am today. And today we are going to be talking about Impressionism. And Impressionism is a word that describes a particular style of art that started about 150 years ago in Europe, in particular in the country of France. And around this time, most artists were expected to kind of create a certain type of art or to follow certain rules. But some artists thought that these rules were a little bit outdated. And so they kind of created their own group of artists and they began exhibiting their artwork together. And they were called the Impressionists. And they kind of changed the way artists were working at the time. They changed the way artists were creating their artworks, the way they actually made art. And they also changed the way, or they changed the things that artists were making their art about. And I'm gonna pull up, I'm in a gallery right now where some of these artworks are on display, but I'm gonna pull up a few examples to show you. There we go. Because in Impressionism, there were many different artists who were making this type of art. So on the left side of the screen, I put up just a few examples by different Impressionist artists that are in our collection here at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. And like I said, Impressionism changed how artists painted and also what they painted. And what we're going to do today to explore Impressionism, we're going to focus in on one particular artist. And that artist you can see on the right-hand side of your screen in a photograph. And his name was Claude Monet. And Claude Monet was from France. And you can see on the screen too the years that he lived. He was born in 1840 and he died in 1926. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus in on this one artist and look at some of the different paintings here at the MFA by Claude Monet. And in fact, we have a whole separate room, a whole gallery of paintings just by this artist. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start moving that direction and we'll get to go into the Monet gallery. And I'm going to actually turn my camera around so you can see where we're headed. And I should point out too, this is the one day of the week that the museum is closed to the public. And that's why it looks very empty here today, because today it's just me and all of you. So it's a little bit quiet here. So this is a gallery and all of the paintings in this room are by Claude Monet. And we're going to look at a few together. I'm going to walk you across the room to start, and then we'll make our way back around. And the first one I'm going to show you, it's actually kind of a pie. So I'm going to turn my camera a little bit. And it's the one right up there. And what I'll do, I'll always show you the real work of art that's hanging on the walls here in the museum gallery. But I also have images of all of these that I can pull up on the screen, which will help you to see some of the details a little bit more closely. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up an image of this painting. And let's see here. Here we go. And next to the image of the painting, I have something that is going to help us learn a little bit about Impressionism today. So I have the word elbow on the screen, and you might be thinking, why are we talking about elbows? We're here to talk about art. But this is going to help you remember the letters of this word, elbow, are going to help you remember some key things about Impressionism. And I'm going to do a quick little turnaround here. Okay, so the letters of elbow are going to help us remember some key things to keep in mind as we're looking at these paintings together today, or anytime. If you find yourself in another museum someday, or looking at maybe in a book, some pictures of Impressionist art, you can remember elbow. So maybe let's all start by just giving our elbow a little tap. So we'll always kind of remember that trick. So the letters in elbow, we're going to go through them one at a time. The E is for everyday life. So when Impressionists were creating this new type of art, they were making paintings about just things in their everyday, ordinary life. So what we see in the painting might not seem particularly special, but just kind of an ordinary, everyday scene. And we can see that in the painting here. This is just a scene of the town where Claude Monet lived at the time. Okay, the L in elbow is for light, because these artists were interested in how they could capture the different effects of light in their painting. The B in elbow is for brushstrokes, because often when they were making these paintings, they were using very quick, fast brushstrokes. And sometimes if you look really closely at the surface of the painting, you can see those quick brushstrokes and the marks they were making on the canvas. The O in elbow is for outdoors, because these artists actually started to go outside to create their paintings. Most of the time before this, artists were always working inside in an art studio. But impressionist artists like to be outdoors in the places looking at the things that they were making their paintings about. And then the W in elbow is for weather. And that's because just how they were also interested in capturing, the different effects of light, they were also interested in capturing weather and the different effects that they could see when they were outdoors. And we'll see that as we go through some of these paintings. So keep those things in mind, elbow, as we go through and look at these different artworks together. I'm going to pull this down and I know there's been a lot happening in the chat, so I want to make sure.
Just going to ask you, Lauren,
Yeah.
I have some questions reserved to the side, but one of them that just came up was, are these the original paintings that we are looking at?
That is such a good question. And sometimes I forget to say that. Yes, these are all the original works of art. They're not copies, they're not replicas, they are the one of a kind actual paintings. So like the one that I just had up on the screen that's hanging on the wall behind me, that's the actual painting that Claude Monet made in 1875. So it's pretty exciting to get to see the real things. I'm glad to share them with you. Okay. Oh, I see another question in the chat asking me about the museum and how long the museum has been open. 1876, I think, is the year the museum first opened. I don't know why I think I was just talking about the painting being in 1875, so now I'm questioning whether I have that exactly right, but I think that is correct. And when the museum first opened, we were in a different building than where we are today, and just in a different part of Boston. And I think this building where we're located today opened in maybe 1909. So we've been around quite a while. Yeah, good question.
Well, since we're asking about the museum a little, what is the oldest painting that you have in the museum?
Oh, well, that's a good question too. And I don't know, I'd have to look that up. Because the museum has so many different types of art, we don't just have paintings, we also have sculptures. We have a lot of things from ancient civilizations. So the oldest object in the museum, it's not a painting, but it's a small container from ancient Mesopotamia. I don't know if any of you all are studying ancient civilizations yet, but it's a small container. It would probably fit in the palm of my hand. And it's shaped like an animal, like a hare. And it's thousands of years old. But as far as the oldest painting, I'm not sure. I'd have to do a little bit of investigating to find an answer to that. Yeah. And the newest, I see another question too, the newest painting in the museum. I can't name one specifically, but we have contemporary art, which is art of our time that artists are making right now. So I know there are things in the museum that were just created in the last year or two. So one of the fun things about this museum is that we go all the way from ancient times, things that are thousands of years old, all the way up right to today. So I'm going to start moving us across the gallery to our next painting. You can keep those questions coming, but I'm going to move us on to our next artwork. So I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer and give you a look at the real thing here. And then I'm going to pull up a slide. Now this painting was made the same year as the last one I showed you. And it's actually, I mentioned in that snowy scene that I had up a while ago, that was the town where Claude Monet lived at the time. And actually in that painting, you can actually see his house where he lived. But this one is also in the same location in the same year. But this painting shows a scene in the artist's garden at his house. So we're not looking at the town now, we're looking at a scene in the garden at his home. So I'm going to ask you all to take a close look at this painting for a minute and just try to notice as many details as you can. Let your eye look from the left to the right, maybe from the top to the bottom, and just take in the whole picture. And then I have a question for you all that you can respond to in the chat. I'm wondering, as you've looked at this painting a little bit, what's going on in this painting? what observations can you all make about what you're seeing here? So I'll give you a few seconds to put some ideas in the chat, and we'll share some of those out.
And while we're waiting for those answers to come in, Lauren, there was a couple of questions about Claude Monet. And that was, did his paintings become famous while he was alive, or were they after he passed away?
While he was alive, but maybe not everywhere, and maybe not everybody loved them. So like it took a while, I think, for people to like a larger audience to appreciate them. But I think in particular, there must have been people who lived here in Boston who really loved his artwork, because there were a lot of people here who collected these works of art. And that's why today here at the museum, we have a pretty large collection of paintings by this artist that you won't find at all museums.
And
So.
that went along with the other question I was going to ask you as those answers came in of what students are observing was, how many paintings did Monet have? Do we know? That's really hard, I'm sure.
I bet somebody knows the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head, but I imagine the number is pretty high. He made a lot of paintings. And in fact, you'll kind of see that too in the next one we're going to look at. Sometimes he made a lot of paintings just about like painting the same thing over and over and over again. So I don't know, we'll have to look up and see if there is somebody has a total number. All right, let's take a look at some of your responses in the chat of what you all were noticing in this painting. So I see some comments, we're noticing a garden. We see somebody sewing. Somebody's wondering if perhaps this is a mother and a child, because we see a figure on the left who looks like an older woman, and then maybe a young child on the right. It looks like they're outside. Somebody else is agreeing. It looks perhaps maybe like a mother and a daughter. We're also noticing that the little girl is reading and playing in the garden. And then the woman sitting next to her looks like she might be doing some sewing. A lot of people agreeing that the lady is sewing. Somebody else is noticing a toy horse sitting on the ground. Somebody says there are warm, beautiful colors in this painting, that it looks like summer. And I'm wondering too, are there other clues in the painting besides the colors? Tell me what you see that makes you say this is showing us it's summertime. Somebody else agreeing with that the woman might be sewing or maybe even knitting. Okay. Looks like the baby, the child might be reading a book. Okay. Thank you all so much for sharing out these observations. I hope I got all or most of them. And I'll point out a couple of things that you all were noticing here. So we see in the painting, we see a woman here. We see she's looking down, working on something in her lap. Perhaps she's sewing. Somebody noticed this little toy horse sitting on the ground. And then we see a child here who's also looking down at their lap and has a little book. Somebody is also noticing the little bow in the child's hair. And then going back to that question I asked, of kind of following up on what do we see that tells us what time of year it is? There's lots of flowers. So behind these two figures, they're kind of sitting in the grass, but behind them, we see lots of flowers. So we are thinking, I've seen in the chat a couple of different ideas. Maybe it's spring, maybe it's summertime. So we can definitely tell a little bit about the season. I wonder too, if as you were looking at this painting, you were definitely noticing the two figures and what they're doing and what we see of the outdoors. But one of the things I mentioned earlier when we were talking about that idea of elbow was the brush strokes. And if you look really closely, I wonder if you can notice, especially on some of those flowers, where the paint is actually a little bit thicker. You can see where the artist applied those brush strokes to the surface of the painting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pull this one down. And we're going to start heading across the gallery to our next. And actually, for our next stop, we're going to look at two paintings. And it's the two that you see right in front of me here. They're hanging next to each other in the gallery. And I'll pull up a slide of these again in a moment so you can see them a little more closely. But both of these paintings were made in the same year. Claude Monet painted these in 1891. So we're going to take a minute and look at both of the paintings. I'll go ahead and pull up that slide now. Let's see. All right, here we go. So just like with the last painting, I'm going to ask you all just to take a moment to look closely at the painting on the left and the painting on the right. Now, both of these paintings show a stack of grain in a field. We can see that. I'll go ahead and mark that on the screen. So you see a stack of grain here, and we see a stack of grain here. But what I want you to think about as you look closely is I'm wondering, what differences do you notice between the two paintings? So one of the things that's the same is that stack of grain, which I heard somebody just put in the chat, or I saw in the chat, somebody said it looks kind of like a little hut. It does, but it's a big stack of grain in a field. So that's something that's the same. We see that in both paintings. But what's different about the two paintings? What do you see that are differences between the painting on the left and the painting on the right? They're two separate paintings, which that was a question in the chat too. I have them on my screen here side by side, but they are two separate paintings. So let's take a look at the chat and see what you're noticing that are differences in how the artist has created each of these images. So on the left, the stack of grain looks smaller, whereas in the painting on the right, the stack of grain looks bigger. We're also, somebody says we're looking from different angles. So maybe where like we are as viewers of looking out to this stack of grain, we're kind of coming at a different angle in each painting. Somebody also thinks these are in the painting that tells us that these might be different times of day. Are there any particular clues you're noticing? We're noticing some differences in the colors. Somebody described that as, the painting on the left having more blues and the one on the right having more browns. And I think somebody else in the chat earlier described that in a different way and said one has cool colors and one has warm colors. Let's see. Oh, somebody's noticing the painting on the right has a sunset. And more people are agreeing that these are probably different times of day, different colors, and maybe also different seasons. So somebody says, I think one might be in the summer and one might be in the winter. Great, thank you for all of these really good observations. And I'm adding on to what the last comment, that the painting on the left is the one that we think might be in the winter, whereas the painting on the right might be summer. Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and, you can keep on adding to the chat. I just wanna share with you a little bit more about these two paintings by Claude Monet. So the title of these paintings tell us what that large object is, that it's a grain stack. Sometimes it's referred to as a haystack. But these were stacks of hay that were left in the field after harvest time. So it does look kind of like, I think some people, earlier were describing, it looks like a hut. It's a big stack of grain that was left in the field after harvest. And Claude Monet, within the span of about 1 year, made, 25 different paintings about these grain stacks. So within 1 year, he made 25. I just have the two examples here at our museum to show you, but he made about 25 total. So I'm curious to hear if you all have any thoughts about why do you think this artist might have made 25 paintings about grain stacks? So why do you think he was painting the same thing over and over and over again within such a short span of time. If you all have any ideas about that, you can share in the chat. And while you do that, I'm going to pull up one of the things I mentioned earlier when I was first introducing that idea of elbow. Remember, the E was for everyday life. And I said a lot of these artists were painting things that were just kind of everyday scenes for them. And that's true of these paintings too. I'm going to pull up, here's a photograph. The photo on the left side of the screen is from the year 1905. And this is a photo of what Monet would have seen near his house where he lived in France at the time. And you can see in the field those grain stacks. And so this was a familiar sight for him, something that he saw often. And that's what he was making his paintings about. And then you can see on the right-hand side of the screen too, I have both of those paintings we were just looking at. And also then I put the names of the painting there now, and you can see the one on the top is meant to appear what the grain stack would look like in the snow. And then the one on the bottom of the screen now is the grain stack as it would appear at the time of sunset. Let's take a quick look at the chat. Let's see. Somebody thinks maybe he just painted it over and over again because he just really liked that painting. Another response is that maybe he kept doing it over and over again to practice. Maybe he was trying to get better or practice something specific in these paintings. He was practicing, he was observing. Maybe he was making a story. So having more than one, maybe he was building some kind of story or narrative that he wanted to tell. Lots of people are saying practicing and getting better. I also have a response in the chat. Maybe he made these many paintings of the same thing to show the different times of day, to show different seasons and different months. And then I like the one too in all caps, because he loved grain stacks. And maybe he did really love grain stacks too. But one of the things, and like I mentioned earlier when we were talking about that idea of elbow, is that many of these artists were really interested in exploring the changing effects of light and weather outdoors. So that's also definitely one of the things he was doing in making multiple paintings like this. And he did this with other things too. It wasn't just the grain stacks. When an artist makes multiple paintings like this, we call it a series. And he did many different series. And I'm actually going to turn my camera back around and show you as I make my way. So we have the two grain stack paintings here. And then as I move down this wall, you can see a couple of other pairs. Here's two paintings he did showing a cathedral in France. And then we have another two paired here that show the same scene, but again, you can notice the different colors, the different lighting. And then we're going to turn, and this is going to be our last stop, taking a look at this pair right here. So this is another series that Monet did where he painted the same subject over and over and over again. And these paintings are called water lilies. And I'm going to actually come in a little bit closer on this one. We'll take a look. We're going to focus in on this one for a moment. So this painting was made in the year 1907. And again, with this painting, Claude Monet is painting something that's really familiar to him. In his house, or at his house in France, behind his home, he had this large garden, and in the garden was a pond. And so this was something, you know, that was just behind his house that he was making, again, many paintings about this pond. So let me pull up the slide so you can get a little bit closer look. And there we go. Okay, so we're looking at a painting of a pond in the artist's garden. So I'm actually just going to ask you to begin by, let's just name off some of what do we see in this painting? When we look at the painting, what can we see? Somebody says we see water. We see lily pads. More people are noticing the lily pads. Flowers. Anything else? So when we look at this painting, we're seeing water, lily pads, flowers. If anybody else has anything to add, you can keep on adding to the chat. I think I did see another one coming in. I want to, yeah. A couple of people are now adding to the chat that we also see reflections in the water. Okay. So with this painting, when we look at the painting, it's almost like we are just looking at the surface of the water. It's like we're standing near the pond, kind of looking down at the surface of the water. But we really can't see what's around the pond. We can't see the rest of Claude Monet's garden, or the other things that are growing there, or like where the land and the water meet. Like we're not seeing the larger garden. We're kind of just focused in on looking at the pond and the surface of the water. So I'm wondering, even though what we can see in the painting is a little bit limited, the artist is still giving us some other clues. And I'm wondering, what are there clues? Are there things that you see in the painting that might tell us what might be nearby in the garden? Are there clues in the painting that might tell you what time of year or what season it might be? I already see some responses in the chat saying trees. So in the painting, we can't see the actual trees, right? But we know they're there. How do we know the trees are there? And I see a lot of people too are putting comments in the chat about the seasons and saying it's probably spring or summer, because we notice those flowers. And so that's probably telling us that if we think about the time of year, it's probably spring or summer. And then now I'm seeing in the chat too, we see the reflection. In the surface of the water, we can see those trees reflected. So even though we can't see the trees, we know they're close by. And I'm going to share with you, I actually shared this photo with you at the beginning of the program when I first showed you Claude Monet, but I'm going to pull it up again because in this photo, I want you to take a look at it again now, because in the photo, Claude Monet is actually standing in the gardens behind his house next to the water lily pond that we see in both of these paintings. And so you really get a sense of what the space was like and what it looked like there. And now you can also see the tree branches right above Claude Monet's head. So we get a better sense of that whole space. Okay, now what we're gonna do, I'm gonna ask you all to use your imaginations with me. And we are going to imagine if we could just like step into this painting. So if you need to close your eyes for a minute, you're welcome to do that. And I want you to imagine we are going on a visit to Claude Monet's garden in France. And maybe we'll pretend that it actually is spring or summer. It's not feeling springy or summery where I am today. So let's maybe pretend it's spring or summer. We're going on a visit to Claude Monet's house in France, and we're gonna go on a walk in his garden. And we're gonna be walking down that path next to the water lily pond where we just saw him standing in that photograph. And we're gonna imagine what it would be like to be there in that space. And I'm gonna ask you to think about, we're gonna kind of use our senses a little bit and think about what we might hear as we're walking around through the gardens. Is there anything we might feel? What do we see around us? So if you want to pick one of those, I kind of put 3 sentences at the bottom that I just put the beginning. And I want to see how you all might end those. As you're imagining walking through this garden, if you want to pick one of those sentences to finish, or if you want to do more than one, that's fine too. You can put your responses in the chat. What are some things that we can imagine being in that space that we might, other things we might see around us, other things we might hear? And let's see if we can kind of create this experience together of what it would be like to be on a walk in this garden. All right, in the chat, I am seeing that we might hear some frogs. Definitely, I think with a pond, there'd probably be some frogs there. So we'd hear some, could we maybe describe that as croaking? There might be some other words out there to describe frog sounds. We might hear some chirps. And I wonder if those are those bird chirps, or are the chirps coming from something else? You can send me a message in the chat. Oh, somebody else is adding that there is a bridge in this garden. And you're right, there is. I'm looking around the room. There is a painting where Claude Monet depicts the bridge. There's not one on view here around me. I can't show you, but we might take a walk across the bridge as we are walking through the gardens. Somebody else might hear crickets, birds, frogs. We might feel a warm breeze of air as we're walking around. We might smell the scent of those flowers. Here's a new sound we might hear. Perhaps we might hear a splash in the water if there are fish, or the frogs might make a splashing noise too. We might feel the wind, that breeze. I wonder also if it's windy, can you think of anything else we would hear? I'm imagining the noise of those branches that I could see above Monet's head as he was standing in that photograph. I wonder if we might hear kind of a little rustle of the leaves if the wind's blowing. Oh, somebody also is adding a new sensation that they could feel the cool water. So yeah, what if we reached our hands down and dipped our fingers in that water? You think it might feel cool to the touch? Great. Oh, we might see butterflies. That's a new one. We might feel the grass. Yeah, maybe could we be barefoot, maybe even walking in the grass? Or if there's a sandy path, we might feel that too. Somebody said they would feel a heavy toad on them when they jump in the pond. I was imagining maybe just dipping my fingers in, but if you go for it, if you can imagine jumping in, I wonder what it would be like. Well, there might be bugs, there might be flies. Great. Somebody asked in the chat too, how big is the garden? I'm not exactly sure how big it is. I've never been there. It would be a really cool place to actually go visit. So I'm not sure of the actual size, but it is, if you go to France and if you're traveling in that area, his house, the house where he lived, is open for visitors, and you can go and you can actually visit the gardens and the house. Okay. Well, thank you all for imagining that with me. That was nice. That was our last artwork for today. So I'm just going to take a moment and go ahead and thank all of you for joining. Thank you for looking and sharing all of your really wonderful observations and your questions. If there are any more questions, I'm happy to stay on another minute or two and answer any other questions you all have before we sign off for today.
I was gonna say there are some more questions, Lauren. And then I'm gonna drop some links into the chat before we get to those questions. They're gonna be the upcoming community of learning programs, the amazing programs Museum of Fine Arts Boston has to offer on CILC, and then also a link directly to their website. I encourage you to look what they have to offer and book directly with them. One of them came in. What is the most famous painting at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston? Like, what are you known for? Or maybe you have the top couple.
Yeah. I would say this room is one of the big big spots to visit when you come to this museum. It's pretty special because we have so many paintings by this one artist. Um, Another place that a lot of people like to visit in our museum is all the way on the other side of the building. So I can't show it to you right now, but it's in our Art of the Americas wing. And for any of you that have maybe studied like the American Revolution, perhaps, we have a painting of a person named Paul Revere that you will often see in a lot of your textbooks. And we have the real thing here. So I think that's another one that a lot of people who come here like to go see that one in person. But we have a lot of really special artworks. It's hard to name just a few top pieces. And I think because we have so many different types of art here that different people who come might have different kinds of things that they want to see that are their favorites. So it might depend on the person you ask too. Yeah.
Perfect. Another one is, where did you find all of these paintings, or how did they come to the museum?
That is a great question. So the things in the museum's collection can come to us in a few different ways. Sometimes the museum will purchase a painting. There might be something specific that we want a painting by this artist in our museum. And so we might look for a specific painting to fill that part of our collection and make that purchase. Sometimes there are people who have collected artworks that they're able to do that. They collect these works of art, and then they might give a painting or any type of artwork as a gift to the museum. So sometimes things are given to us and become a part of the collection. And then there are other parts of our collection where things came to us through like archaeological excavations. Like when we learn about our collection of ancient Egyptian art here at the museum, the MFA actually led excavations in Egypt a long time ago, and those objects were acquired through those archaeological excavations. So there's a different story depending on the work of art. And actually, one really cool thing is that with any work of art in the museum's collection, if you go onto the MFA's website and you can look up each work of art, and if you pull up the information for that artwork, it will tell you the history of how it came to the museum, if somebody else owned it before us, who was that person, and when did it come to the museum. So it gives you a whole history of each artwork.
That is
Right.
cool, and I never thought about archaeological digs as a way for you to
Yeah.
get artwork, Lauren. So
Yeah.
yeah, learn something new. How many paintings are in the museum?
The museum started with a collection of around 500, no, 5,000 artworks. And now I think we're closer to 500,000.
That is a
So,
lot. Wow. What's your biggest painting by Monet?
probably this one
Perfect.
right here behind me, which I think is kind of unusual compared, like all the other ones in this gallery are smaller. He did have some really, really massive paintings, not here at this museum, of the water lilies, which I'd have to look up the size of them, but huge. So
Perfect. Have you done any paintings before?
I mean, yes, I have. I wouldn't call myself a painter though. I love learning about works of art, whether they're paintings or sculptures, from all different places and cultures. But I don't make art as much as I like just to learn about it, because it takes me to different places from all around the world and different times, and always get to learn something new.
Um, Another question is, what is your favorite painting?
Actually, one of my favorite paintings here at the museum is the grain stack that we looked at earlier, the sunset grain stack. I love the colors in this painting. They make me feel warm and cozy and happy. So that's one of my favorites.
Oh, and do you have
Let's
the
see.
first one he painted? And Or what was the first painting that Monet painted, and do you have it?
I'm going to say no, I don't think we have it. I can't say that with absolute certainty. I'm not sure what his very first would have been. That's a really good question. But I imagine it's not in our collection here, but that would be a fun thing to look up and learn. I'm going to have to brush up on all my Monet facts
Monet.
for you all. You have some really great questions.
They do have some good
Yeah.
ones there. How big is the museum?
Hmm. It's huge. It's like a whole city block. It's some parts of the building, we have like 3 floors. It's kind of been added on to year after, we've kind of grown and gotten bigger. So I don't know what like the total square feet of the museum is, but it would like sometimes when I'm working here, like I'm here all day and I need to get up and stretch my legs, I go for a walk around the museum because it's that big. Yeah.
Which comes into 2 questions that have popped up in the chat. One of them is, if I were to go to the museum, could I see it all in one day? And the other part is, do you give tours, or are individuals just allowed to walk through the galleries and enjoy the art on their own
Yes.
pace?
Great questions. So when you come to the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, you can come in and do it at your own pace and look completely on your own. We also do have tours that are available that you can just come in on the day of and join up with a tour. So you could do a little bit of both if you wanted to. You could do some looking on your own. You could also join a tour, whatever works for you. And I would say you could try to see it all in one day, but you'd probably be pretty tired by the end of the day. And when I talk to people who live close by enough that they can come more than one time, I always say, don't try to see it all in one day, because then you really have to rush and you might feel worn out by the end of your visit. So if you can visit more than one time, I think that's a great way to do it. And I see somebody in the chat got us an answer, I think, to the question about Monet's garden. They said it's about 2.5 acres. So thank you for looking that up for us.
That's a good sized garden.
Yeah.
Is there a cost to visit the museum?
There is. We do have an admission fee. There are certain times when you can visit free of charge. So if you are close by and you can have a choice of when you come, be sure to check the website so that you have all of that admission information.
Perfect.
Right.
And I think we covered most of them there.
Super.
Unless you know what the smallest painting is.
There is I think just a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a different program about the art of Renaissance Italy. And there was this little painting we were talking about that would probably fit in my hand. The way we described it was that it was about the size of like a phone that you would hold in your hand. And it was this little tiny self-portrait by an artist named Sofonisba Anguissola, and she was a woman artist in the Renaissance. And it's small. I don't know like the exact measurements, but it would fit in your hand. I don't know if it's the smallest in the entire museum, but I'm going to have to do some investigating and find out some of these answers for you all.
Oh, but yeah, there were some good questions out there. Thank you, students. And thank you, Lauren, for an amazing tour. I love looking at all the art. It's absolutely gorgeous. It was a great way to kind of relax on my lunch hour and get to share some art with all of you. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I hope you check out the amazing links that I dropped into the chat, teachers and students. I'll drop them in there one more time since we had great chat today. We had the link to the upcoming community learning programs, all the programs that the Museum of Fine Arts Boston does, and then a direct link to their website. If you ever get to Boston, you can check it out. Otherwise, if you can't visit them physically, definitely look at all the things that they have virtually and book a program directly with them. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of the day. And we hope to see you again. Thank you, Lauren.
Bye-bye.